Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Someone emailed in, went to the website, emailed me directly from there. Patron Anna from Houston says, would it have been helpful for Johnny and Amber to have been in individual therapy and couples therapy? How would that work? Would it be 3 separate therapists working together? Well, there's a lot I could say, but what I would recommend for Johnny and Amber, or people in this situation, would absolutely be both individuals in individual therapy, perhaps even twice a week, because they both might require that, and they both might even want that, Amber in particular, if she does have borderline. Borderline individuals often want more contact with their therapist, and that actually can accelerate treatment and recovery. Also, couples therapy once a week, not this sort of random schedule that they were on. They would need to come every week, and if they weren't in town because they were working on a movie or something, then there should be a remote session. And sometimes there's legal, ethical problems with that because the client isn't in the state that you're licensed in, but sometimes you can figure out some way to actually make that work legally. And that would absolutely help. The individual therapy and the couples therapy for the two of them, I strongly suspect it would take years and years and years. So for Johnny and Amber, I would imagine they would be looking at 30 years of therapy, maybe at the very least 10. Couples therapy, again, at least 5. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't need and benefit from 10, 15 years of therapy. With a lot of couples that I work with, I will transition to fewer than once a week sessions because it just feels right after a certain point, and they definitely need to meet with me every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks sort of thing. So I'm guessing that they would absolutely need that in order, 1, to function as human beings, but also 2, to work as a couple. I've been working my way through the entire trial, which I think was kind of a mistake because it's so much time to watch this thing and react to it. I mean, I'm enjoying it. It's interesting. And, it's not often that we get a chance to go into this sort of situation, and that it's on YouTube, and that it involves so many things related to psychology and drug abuse and intimate partner violence. So, I'm enjoying it, but I had no idea how much I would watch. But anyway, I finally got up yesterday to Amber Heard's testimony, which started a couple weeks ago, but then they had that week break. Anyway, anonymous upper tier patron, she says, I left a very physically and psychologically abusive marriage of 20 plus years, 7 years ago, and after hearing many of your deep dives, one could conclude that my ex-husband had both narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, and sometimes histrionic personality disorder. When I listened to the recording of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp's argument, I was shocked to hear some of the same language being used by Amber that my ex used on me. I was also, like Johnny, avoidant, but I did not feel like I could fight or argue back. And over time, I would believe that I was a coward for running away, and I was weak for not fighting for us or doing the work, even though I never understood what the work meant. Yeah, so just chiming in here, I don't know, but it sounds to me like the way that Anonymous Upper Tier Patron is describing it is similar to Amber Heard. In that the way that the recordings come across, it's impossible for me to know, but the snippets that I've heard, it sounds to me like a lot of the conflict that I work with my couples. And if she is borderline, she's pursuing and wanting contact, and also really angry and hostile and wants to just rage at him, but also deeply wants him to be close to her. So has all these feelings and is just saying a lot of words that don't allow for the other person to really respond in a way that soothes Amber or soothes Anonymous Upper Tier Patron's partner. I hope I'm explaining that right. It's hard for me to know, but the way that conflicts go, there's always a point where there's usually a point where couples will cross a line, and they're just screaming at each other, yelling at each other, or trying to get ammo. I said, no, you didn't. I said, no, it's always you. And they cross that line, and they're no longer trying to actually work out the conflict. So there's that. But the way that Amber is barking at Johnny Depp, and I'm not saying that in a mean way. I mean, there are times when she's just yelling at him in a way that doesn't seem to have any coherence, that I think it does come from that feeling place rather than a way to work it out. So, Anonymous Upper Tier Patron is saying that her husband was saying, you got to fight for us. You got to do the work. And she's like, I don't even know what work are you talking about? Give me a path forward and I will do it. But the way this is going on, I don't know. And so unless you understand borderline, then you will this is what gaslighting, happens over time. You're just like, so I'm the coward. I'm the idiot. I don't fight for this relationship. This is all my fault, or at least a good portion of this is my fault. But because the person doing the yelling is coming from a fused emotional state and they're not making any sense, but they feel like they are making sense. And so that's what this person is talking about. I don't know if Amber Heard is as bad as my ex, but it did trigger some memories. And again, I was shocked at similar language that was used. Yeah, I'm quite sure, and I've heard from a lot of people, that this case and me talking about it is highly triggering for people with PTSD along these lines. And of course, people should avoid it at all costs and talk with their therapist about it and heal, and then at a later time come back to the trial. You don't want to be harmed by what is arguably entertainment, I suppose, or educational entertainment. Or are you talking about, anonymous secretary patron, just like I'm reminded, and I'm not having a PTSD trigger, but I am having a little bit of a sweaty palm thing, and that's different. That's not necessarily harmful to have that visceral reminder of what you were going through. The key is if you have a spike in distress and then the commensurate depression and anxiety that comes along with that, and lack of sleep, and that can affect you for days. That's obviously when you want to not engage in things that will trigger that, including watching videos like this. And so, yeah, I'm sorry you went through that, anonymous secretary patron. I hope that you have been able to recover. And the other part about this that you mentioned is that he would do what Johnny Depp did, where Johnny Depp cut his finger and he was writing in blood. And it's hard to know what exactly that. The more and more this was harder for me to detect because the data wasn't blaringly obvious, but the more I listened to that, Johnny Depp has a masochistic defense. It's not something we often talk about. You could consider it almost like a personality disorder, but for people that are abused physically and they're terrified, one of the ways to cope with that is to internalize the abuser, right? And I could go down a long explanation of this, but in a nutshell, we internalize the abuser and we will abuse ourselves from within and from without. This could result in cutting. It could result in self-sabotage. It could result in doing things that ruin your life, and or being with other people who are going to abuse you, who call you names, and never really leaving the relationship. So he seems to have some level of masochism, and it comes out in that scene where he's talking about cutting himself with a knife. I don't know where he was threatening, and Amber's like, no. Essentially, it's like it's a weird mixture of both recreating something that happened in the past to try to work it out, and also to garner some level of sympathy, to help people to understand this is how I express that I am suffering, is that I sabotage my life so that it will be so obvious that my life is falling apart that people will come to my aid. Of course, this doesn't work, because if people see you doing it to yourself, they don't come to your aid. They might even reject you or yell at you or something. Not always, but it's this unconscious desperation. It's also an expression of anger. It's like you want to be rageful to the outside, but you don't feel safe to do that, so you just direct it at yourself. There seems to be a lot of that. So like when his finger was cut, instead of yelling at Amber, which would have been rational, he writes a bunch of things on, in blood and it's an expression of, look what's happening to me, and I don't know how to express what's happening to me, and I'm trapped, and it's really sad, actually. And I just tremendously feel bad for the two of them and what they're going through in the press, and mostly I feel bad for them because I don't think they're going to get the help that they need. They're either not going to engage in it, or they won't be consistent with it, or they won't find the right professionals. Anonymous patron in Arizona, she says, I was listening to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard episode number 9 of Kirk's, and he was talking about hiring forensic experts. I work in the medical malpractice field, and we hire experts to review cases. We don't want experts to be biased on one side or the other. We pay them to review a case, and if they agree with our side, we might hire them to give testimony at trial. If they do not agree with us, we still pay them to review the case, just not to give testimony. What we want above all else is competence and an ability to present well, not someone who will say whatever we want, because eventually those types of experts become unusable. I hope it's the same for forensic experts, but I don't know. Well, that's interesting. I always like hearing from, people who work in the fields that I'm talking about. And I'm trying to understand, anonymous patron from Arizona who emailed in, exactly what you mean there, because on one hand you're saying we just want an unbiased professional expert opinion in the medical malpractice case, but we will only ask the one that agrees with us to testify. So I'm guessing that means that all the reports are available to the court, but you only have one person that testifies. So even if that's all true, that still presents with your side isn't just hiring an unbiased person, you're presenting someone that agrees with your case. The other thing is that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. This is the way the system works, so you got to do what you got to do. But the other thing that you're not necessarily accounting for is the experts, they depend on getting your business. When people start practices as forensic experts, it's not like they just get paid a salary by the government. They get paid by the case. And if they don't get the case, they don't get paid. And if they do a bad job or they don't do what is hoped of them, then they know that they'll never get hired again. Either unconsciously they know this or consciously. And at the very least, they know consciously that this is true. Whether or not that affects them or not, I don't know. And in forensic psychology, it's the same thing. Their mortgage depends on them getting paid. They have office that they have to pay for, and they have student loans they have to pay off. And so there's a huge economic incentive to cut corners ethically or to see things that will please the client so that you can continue to get work. Anyway, but when I was considering doing this work many years ago, I've already viewed all the reasons why I didn't want to do it. But the more I think about it, watching this trial, because it's reminding me of all this, and also I have more distance and more experience, frankly, between then and now, that I really think that the expert industry is corrupt. I mean, it is the definition of corruption. You pay for someone to present an idea. Your money pays for someone to say what you want them to say. When you want a politician to pass your bill to pass a law or a bill that allows you to pollute the oceans, or when you pay a politician to suppress data that demonstrates that cigarettes cause cancer, and that politician goes along with it, that is the very definition of corruption. When you pay a psychologist who should be doing things on the up and up to say what you want them to say, then that's corruption, and when you see the obvious differences between these forensic experts, it's so obvious, and this happens all the time. Now, I didn't go into this work, so I only have a little bit of knowledge of it from the outside. So forensic psychologists might disagree and say, no, sometimes, the Johnny Depp team hires someone and they don't really find exactly, but, you still put them up on the stand. Do we believe that that's really true? Maybe if the legal team or the client doesn't have enough money to search for yet another forensic psychologist, maybe. But, the Hughes-Curry statements are the direct opposite of each other. And if they both said, look, when I look at the data, this is my opinion, but, you should take that with a grain of salt because, of course, the other psychologist saw something different. So, what do I know? It's just my take. I wasn't there. If they both said that, that's not corrupt, right? That's just them saying, well, I don't know. When I see this, that's what but they didn't say that. They said, this is the truth. This happened over here, and then over here they said, no, it didn't. This happened. Or someone's saying, Dr. Hughes is saying this happened, and the other person is saying, I have no idea what happened, but here's my diagnosis. Anyway, the point is that if we educated the jury to know all this stuff, then they would take everything with a grain of salt. But do juries do jurors understand this? I doubt it. Does the general public I feel like it's that what props this industry up is this idea that psychology is this hard science, that somehow these people have these hard and fast scientific ways of coming to these conclusions, when it's clearly a lot of opinion and a lot of bent on things. And so, in the same way that you don't hire a judge, each side doesn't hire a judge, they're just given a judge by the jurisdiction. They should just be given a forensic expert. A forensic psychologist should just be provided, or 3 should be provided, and you just have to deal with what they found. Because then at least, isn't the whole idea trying to get at the truth? Because the method would, I'm guessing, have a better ability to get at the truth. Now, of course, it completely dismantles the entire, and maybe in addition, whenever one side brings a forensic psychologist in, you also have to pay for an independent government assigned. I don't know, I'm just trying to figure this out. And I guess I get so animated about it because I am very, very curious as to what is going on with those two. And with what we got, we have no idea. Daming says, I had an experience with an abusive ex who went to therapy. He told me the therapist diagnosed me with narcissism. So, just so you understand, Daming had an abusive ex who went to therapy. The ex talked with their therapist, and the therapist apparently diagnosed the commenter here with narcissism without ever meeting the individual. But who knows, because the abusive ex comes home and says, my therapist diagnosed you with narcissism. Then that therapist suggested I also come in for a joint session, which I declined for obvious reasons, and that was used as an additional evidence that supported my narcissism. Could be that my ex made it all up, but I don't think so. Oftentimes, abusive people use therapy as a vehicle to further abuse and to justify that abuse, and it shocks me that more therapists aren't careful about it. Yeah, absolutely. So, could it all be a lie that your abusive ex committed? Absolutely. But it doesn't surprise me. There are plenty of therapists that don't know what they're doing and would diagnose from afar like that. And yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It's really ridiculous. And it's further supported by the detail you gave that the therapist is working individually with your ex, and you're talking a lot about you, and the therapist suggests that you come into therapy. For what? You're going to change the treatment plan to couple therapy? Like, you can do that under some rare circumstances, but you have to be very careful about that. And that wouldn't be the first recommendation. The first recommendation would be, the two of you clearly need couple therapy. Here's a referral. And I see individual therapists do this frequently, that they'll be talking with their client, talking. They're complaining about their partner, complain. And they're like, let's bring them in. It's like, what? Couple therapy is a very important modality of therapy that both individuals need to trust the therapist, and to just bring the spouse into individual therapy and then when you're done, kick him out again. That doesn't make any sense ethically in terms of how treatment plans and how the relationship between client and therapist works. Some might argue that it's fine. I would argue it's not, because in order, when the thing that I always say to my trainees when they start playing around with this stuff is, there are two types of people you will talk to as a therapist, as a clinician. You will talk to clients, patients, or you will talk to collateral contacts. And you always have to know which person they are if you're talking to someone professionally. For example, you could, if you're talking to an individual, bring in their spouse as a collateral contact. Like, I'll do this sometimes if I'm talking to an individual and they tell me that they're suicidal, I will absolutely want to involve their spouse in the treatments, because the spouse is there all the time and will be there to monitor and call the police or, help, or, they need to be a part of it. And I could ask my client to go home and give the whole spiel to them, but it's much easier for bringing the spouse. I talk to the spouse directly, get the spouse involved. We make an agreement among the three of us that the spouse is absolutely involved in the, crisis intervention plan and the safety plan. And so then I actually have them sign it, and then I can document it as well. It's another part of this. You have to do a little bit of cover your butt because if they actually do kill themselves, you have to show a paper trail of evidence that you actually did everything you could to prevent that. And bringing the spouse in, is a pretty good measure to make sure that it was well communicated and they understand and they sign on the, the safety plan. So in a situation like that, the spouse is a collateral contact. I am not treating them. They're not my client. They're someone that is coming in that I'm talking to that is assisting my work with my client, right? Now, some people might get a little fuzzy around that, but I don't. I'm pretty clear about it, because if they are a client, then I have to get them to sign all my paperwork. I need to do an intake. I need to potentially diagnose them. And once they're a client of mine, they have all the rights of a client, meaning that I can't just shoo them away. If they want to stay engaged with me, I can't just, because I don't want to work with them because I was stupid with my treatment plan, I can't just tell them no. So, once you have a client, they have all the rights, and you can't have someone that's in between. You can't have someone that's in between a collateral contact or a client. They either are a client, which provides them all the ethics and the laws and the responsibilities thereof, or they're a collateral contact. So if you bring in a random spouse into the room and you start treating that person and you start trying to work on their relationship with the spouse in the room, that's a client. And you can be sued out of your practice if you do harm and they take that to a judge or to the licensing board and they reveal, that this therapist, harmed me, and look at what they did. And you are found that you did not properly get informed consent or treat the clearly that was, person that was a client with all the rights thereof, and it happens. And so when I hear that from you, Daiming, and I also hear that your spouse was saying that therapist diagnosed you with narcissism, it doesn't surprise me, because stupid therapists will do all sorts of stupid stuff. It's not usually just one stupid thing. Because I review cases, and I've also been an expert in defending or accusing people of these kinds of ethical violations. And usually when you see, one dumb thing, you're like, oh, that's kind of dumb. Usually it's just, hundreds of dumb things when you actually start looking into it. So yeah. And the larger point that you're making is that abusive people, if the therapist isn't savvy, will believe what the abusive person is saying and not be very helpful to the client or to anyone. And so was some of the therapists involved in this case doing that? We don't know. Libby says, my partner went to the first session of couples therapy without me or my knowledge. He did that to get there before me so he could give his version of things. He told her all my history and very private things that I only told him. Yeah, so just chiming in here. Yeah, so what you're saying, Libby, is that so my partner went to the first session of couples therapy without me or my knowledge. So you either both agreed to go to couples therapy, and it sounds like that happened, and then he hired the therapist and then made an appointment and went and didn't tell you he was going. And fine, but the therapist should have said, no, I'm sorry, you both need to be here. And that's why whenever I communicate with couples and families in the beginning, I want all their emails even before we meet, so that whatever or phone numbers or however I'm communicating with people, I need to be able to, reply all so that everyone knows everything. And anyway, so, and plus, I don't want to read into this because it's kind of uncomfortable. The client arrives and you're like, oh, it's just you? And the person's like, yeah, it's just me today. What I have to do is say, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. They drove all the way down here. They have to pay for that hour because I might not charge them in that instance, but I have to say, sorry, you got to go. Yeah, you need your partner in here. It's not a comfortable thing to do. And so I do everything to avoid that by doing a proper screening and information process before I ever meet with them. And I've learned that by experience. And most therapists, in my anecdotal experience, don't really do a good job of that. Some do. I only found this out when I went to the second session, which was my first meeting with her. I felt it was so unprofessional, and when I said it, and I said that it was unprofessional, he said to the therapist that I was attacking her. I felt so let down by him and this therapist. So the client goes in and says, I'm upset that, one, you met with my husband without me. Two, that he told you a bunch of things that I've only told him and haven't told anyone else. And now you know about it. And I find that to be unprofessional, which is true. I mean, even if the therapist could make an argument for that, at the very least, the therapist should be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. You're right. Just apologize and, move forward. So I said I was upset by this and didn't think it was right or fair at all. We went to the next session and she apologized to me after she went for her own supervision. Okay, good. That's a good sign. So this thing happened. She was accused by the client, and then she went to supervision, and that might indicate that she's a novice therapist as well, and maybe just didn't know or didn't have good enough, because a good supervisor would also, so if that was me and the supervisee came to me and said, so this client and I'd investigate the situation, I'd be like, oh, that's my fault, because I should have told you as my supervisee that you should have turned him away. That's my fault, not yours. Let's start from the beginning. I apologize to you, supervisee, therapist, for letting you down, and now you have to apologize to your client, and you can apologize on my behalf too. We went to the next session, and she apologized to me after she went for her own supervision. I felt let down by him for revealing very personal things to a stranger. Needless to say, I paid for my own sessions, but it had destroyed any chance of building trust in a relationship. So that was the end of that therapeutic relationship. Had it been dealt with differently, it might have worked out. I think the therapist should have said, I can't do couple counseling without both parties. This is why I didn't like Amber going without Johnny to couple therapy and giving her version of things, because it sways the therapist and it's not fair to anyone involved, in my opinion. I'm glad you are a therapist that considers every scenario. We need more therapists like you. Oh, well, there are many therapists like me. I didn't come up with these ideas on my own. But yeah, it's upsetting that there are problems with this. I get so many emails and comments from people where I just want to scream and just say, go back to graduate school or consult or something with someone that knows it. Anyway, so so you're saying that, so on the issue of version of things, so if in this random world I did have a situation where one person came to me and I heard all this information, I'm experienced enough not to just take all that information as gospel. I would absolutely hold out for, well, I got to talk to the other person. And, so if you find the right therapist, even if they have a lot of reason to be biased against the other partner, they're smart enough and wise enough not to be, or at the very least to do a lot of work to try to build the trust back. And so, things happen. Jam says, I'm currently a mental health professional and was actually taught to write my case notes in the third person, i.e. the clinician, the counselor. For context, I work in Southeast Ohio. Right. So as a one-off comment, while they were reading the counselor's notes, where it says, counselor says this, or, in the RN, when they're referring to them, they're writing in their own notes. Instead of, I talked with a client about X, Y, and Z, they're saying, counselor talked with a client about X, Y, and Z. And so Jam is saying, I was taught to write my notes that way. And yeah, so I don't know I'm sure there's some kind of justification for that, but I don't teach my people to write notes like that. I find it to be, until I hear a viable reason as to why that needs to be the case, I find it to be confusing and pretentious. It's confusing because if you're signing the note, if I'm signing the note, Kirk Honda, and I'm writing the note saying therapist said this and that, the general public would look at that. It's like, well, who's he referring to? Plus, there are times when I do have to refer to a therapist, and I would say that therapist said this. And then I say, therapists listen to therapists. It's just like, just say me, just say I. It's easier that way. And it's pretentious because it comes across like you're trying to make yourself sound legalese or something. I don't know. Clinician said this. It's just say me. Just say I. So there's that. Yeah. But maybe there's some justifiable reason. Or at the very least, like in the beginning, you can say, I, the counselor, did this. And then from then on, everyone knows maybe that's why you have to say it. But That would be so weird because you're the one signing it. It's your progress note. It's not some random, but who cares? No one cares. I care. No one else cares. Toph says, I had to chuckle when you were talking about working from your home and you said something like, have your clients killed their therapists? Because I was ranting about how people would be like, you practice out of your home? And I'm like, do you think that the clients are killing their therapists on a regular basis? Toph says, because at least one of mine has. I am an RN at a federal psychiatric prison. Haha. Yeah, I mean, that's a completely different venue for therapy. And as I probably said when I was ranting, I don't work with clients. They don't really get to refer to me that are prone to that kind of behavior. And very few people are. And of course, even if you have severe mental illness, that doesn't mean you're more likely to hurt me or harm me. But I don't tend to work with clients that would do that kind of thing. And most people won't. Most clients wouldn't. The vast majority of clients wouldn't show up at my house unannounced or stalk me or whatever. And, along those lines, I was talking to Bob, one of my co-hosts on this podcast, on the audio podcast, that he actually had a client or someone, or he was talking, or one of his colleagues was talking, but that there was a client that would go to, or I think it was him, and the client actually figured out where he lived. And the therapist actually worked at an office. And so the client revealed, said, I'm so ashamed, I'm so sorry. I actually drove by I figured out where you lived and I drove by your house, and I just feel so ashamed, I'm so sorry. And the therapist said, and there's some gender issues here because men are less likely to be victimized by people. And so this was a male therapist. And so we just always have to take that into consideration, of course. But this male therapist said to the client, well, thank you for telling me. And why did you do it? And I'm not being combative. I just want to know what was the motivation. And they explore it, and the client says, well, I miss you in between sessions, and you're so comforting to me that I just wanted to, it just makes me feel good to know that you're there. And in between sessions, I intellectually know that you're there, but I feel like I need to see where you're at. I can't see you from the street, but it just makes me feel so much safer to just know, because of relational traumas. And so the therapist said, okay, well, you can do that. Just feel free to drive by my house whenever you want to. In fact, if you want to just park on the other side of the street, that's okay. I'm not going to be able to interact with you ethically, but if I'm not going to call the police or feel threatened, by any, you're not a violent person. You're not going to do anything to me. If it makes you feel better, it's a public street. You can park there. And if you want to park there, then I invite you to do that if you want to. You don't have to, but if that makes you feel better, then, that's okay with me. So that's the kind of work that me and my colleagues do. It's not so rigid about that kind of thing. Now, we have very buttoned up boundaries and rules around the frame of therapy. So I would never, for example, if a client randomly showed up at my door and wanted to talk, I would say, I'm sorry, you're going to have, I'm not a emergency service, and this is not okay. So, I absolutely would draw boundaries, but very few, I've never had a situation where a client, broke a boundary like that. And I've been practicing out of my home for 22 years. At 383 says, I appreciate your approach to teenage patients. I was talking about how, what was I talking about? See, I was 12 when I was talking about how I won't work with teenage clients that don't want to be in therapy because I don't want to waste all of our time, including the clients. I appreciate your approach to teenage patients. I was 12 when my mom first forced me into therapy. I understand why she did it because we'd experienced a massive trauma and loss, but I fully did not speak to her or the therapist for weeks. One therapist told my mom she wouldn't see me if I didn't want to be there, so my mom shopped around until she found a therapist willing to needle at me every week while I didn't talk. It was really traumatizing to be forced into therapy. I only felt comfortable returning to therapy in my 30s, and now I'm emotionally exhausted working through everything so late. For any clinicians reading this, please think carefully of the trauma you're creating by participating in parents forcing their kids into therapy. One therapist finally saw how shut down I was, and we just played board games in each session, and she never tried to push beyond generally asking me about my week. I think she saved my life by not doing therapy at all. Yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you. And yeah, it's upsetting. So this is complicated. So on one level, we have a clear ethical code of autonomy for clients, meaning that if the client doesn't want to talk and doesn't want to be in therapy, then ethically speaking, you have to oblige that. So it's unethical to work with a client, even if the client is a child or a teenager that doesn't want to be there. It's completely unethical. I always say this to people, that a dentist doesn't roam the sidewalks, push people down on the ground and pull out a tooth, even if it's supposed to be pulled out. He's like, oh, I see a cavity, yank, without asking for permission or, providing informed consent and all that kind of stuff. And so we therapists don't provide therapy to people that don't want it from us. It's clear, it's understandable. But on the other hand, a lot of teenagers need time to warm up to you and will benefit and thank you when you take the time to endure those initial sessions where they're being very quiet. So, it's hard to know what to do, but I think there's a way to do it. And that's what your good therapist did, which is what I would do all the time, partially just out of survival, because I'm like, I don't want to just be needling this person. So let's just play games or watch YouTube videos or throw the ball around or go for a walk or something. And or play Legos or draw. I played with a lot of Legos. I love Legos. So I even just bought, I was online and it suggested I buy this thing, and it was like, oh, that's a good suggestion. And it was a guitar, a Fender. I guess Fender's a guitar brand, and they licensed to Lego, I guess. So a red Fender and a deluxe reverb amp. And I don't have a deluxe reverb amp, but I have a Fender amp that's very similar to that, and I have a red Fender. Why am I telling you that? Oh, Legos. So with kids, I would play Legos, and I learned over time pretty quickly, honestly, that when we did that, they would relax and we could actually do therapy. And at 383, it's possible that therapist that played board games with you actually was doing therapy with you, even though you weren't talking about anything that looked like therapy. Because, like, for example, I don't know, but you had been through a massive trauma and loss, and to sit with someone that doesn't exploit you, to sit with someone that respects your boundaries is therapeutic. To sit with someone that you could just have a good time with, to sit with someone that, and as you're playing the game, say your therapist is disappointed, like, oh, I rolled the wrong thing with the dice, or I go to jail on Monopoly, and they will show how to deal with emotions, all that kind of stuff. And just that interaction, that bonding, that's very therapeutic. And this idea that somehow in therapy, you have to be like talking about those things you don't want to talk about is not true. You can do all sorts of things in therapy that have nothing to do with talking about what people stereotypically think you're supposed to talk about in therapy. Anyway, and actually it took me with every supervisee of mine, I would have to beat this into their head. I wasn't aggressive about it, but it was hard for them to comprehend. It's really hard for people to comprehend this because the stereotype of what therapy is supposed to look like. I would have to tell them that, because, especially in family therapy, you're often given this kind of client where there's a teenager or a kid who's been through some stuff, and they just get dropped off of the office, and you're supposed to fix them. And the client is resisting, doesn't want to talk about it. And so I would say, well, there's so many other things you could be doing, and if you continue to needle at that, you're going to lose the client, and you could be harming them. You could just be doing what everyone else has done to this person, which is to disrespect them and to force them to do things they don't want to. That's the definition of abuse. So don't abuse your clients by forcing them to talk about things they don't want to talk about, right? And then they say, well, what am I supposed to do? And I'd say the 99 other options out of 100 that therapists can do in therapy, you don't have to talk about the thing that they went through. Plus, there's symbolism in therapy. So, for example, if you said you went through some trauma. So let's say that you had been sexually abused. Okay, so you're playing Monopoly, Well, okay, so you're playing Monopoly and you land, I'm the therapist, you land on my Park Avenue and I have a hotel. That can feel pretty crappy, right? I have just drained half of your funds. This is late game, and it's just like, and of course, Monopoly would never be short enough to play in a 50-minute session, but you get my drift. Well, so I'm about to take the client's money, and I would intuit as a therapist that something is being triggered, particularly in the venue of therapy. And I think it tends to bring that kind of stuff up to the surface regardless. And so I might say to the client, like, oh, I'm so sorry that you landed there. I know we're playing against each other, but I genuinely feel bad for you that you owe me all this money now. And I don't know what to do because I want to win. And that's the whole idea of the game, but I don't want to make you feel bad, So as I do that, and it's real, it's from the heart, but I'm emphasizing a certain part of my experience, because normally if I was playing with my friends, I wouldn't say that. I'd be like, haha, but I would have that feeling. And so I'm emphasizing that's real, it's authentic, and the emulative or the metaphor there, or the analogy to the client that it touches on could absolutely be therapeutic and healing to that kid, even though we're not talking about the fact that they are sexually abused, right? Now, I never know exactly if it's touching on that, or I often don't know. Sometimes they might literally just say, oh my God, like no one's ever said that to me, that kind of thing, like what I went through, that kind of stuff. So there's so many other things one can do in therapy besides forcing people to talk about things that they naturally don't want to talk about. And that's the other thing, like, do people not understand how trauma works? It's avoided. You will try to avoid it. So to force people who never volunteered to be in therapy in the first place to talk about the very thing that their brain in a healthy way is helping them to avoid thinking about because of how horrible it is to remember it, is compounding the trauma. I'm sorry you went through that. Blotchy says, several times I've had to leave a situation where my partner was in full rage mode, and I was not being passive aggressive, I was just being fearful. Right, so I was talking about how when people will escape a fight, there's a number of different motivations. One is that they're afraid and they're just trying to get away. Another is just like, well, there's really no point, sort of a logical conclusion. It's like, there's no point in us. I keep trying to deal with you and you just keep barking at me and you're in a state. So it's just logical that we just quit while we're behind and just separate. Another is what I was saying is this passive aggressive move of just like, I hope that you understand that I don't like what you're doing, but I can't communicate that to you. So I'm going to turn away from you I hope that you get that. But Blotchy is saying that it was out of fear that they moved away. I figured if I waited it out, maybe there would be less danger, and there never was. No matter how long I hid, it's like he'd continue right where he left off. If anyone reading this is in a similar situation, call the police. It literally never occurred to me to call the police. Absolutely. And I don't know if I've emphasized this enough, that kind of behavior is absolutely worth calling the police. Now, the other alternative is to call a therapist and or a DV advocate by going to the DV hotline online, connecting with resources in your area. Those individuals absolutely know how to help you and support you and know how to help you to figure out what to do. Vela says, Dr. Kirk, the more I listen to your reactions to these Amber Heard Johnny Depp videos, the more I let go of my past. But this video has brought me to tears. There's so much more to say, but I will bring it up with my therapist. Thank you very much for deep diving into this. Well, Vela, I'm so touched and happy that you could have that healing. I don't know what I said, but that, that's why I do this stuff. And, sometimes, like when I read a comment like this, it sort of counteracts this worry I have that I repeat myself so often. Like, especially with the trial, I find myself saying, because I'm reacting off the top of my head and I'm watching over several days, and sometimes I forget what I said or something triggers me to go down a road, and so I'll yammer, and then after I post it, I'm like, I bet you half that stuff is redundant stuff I've already said. That was probably really annoying. And I have this, I don't know if it makes any sense, but this principle that never repeat yourself because they've already heard it. They don't need to hear it again. but I feel like sometimes people do need to hear it again, or in a different way or something. And so when I read this comment, it makes me feel like, because you're saying, Vela, the more I listen to your reactions, the more I let go of my past. But this video brought me to tears, and because I'm guessing everything I said in that video wasn't anything new. Like, it's probably things I've already said before in some way. And so, yeah, that it's helpful for me to know that, because I get emails and comments like that sometimes. It's just like, you've talked about this before, but this time it really hit me. And so, I don't know, it just really is the whole reason why I'm doing this. Deanna says, I can't believe Dr. Honda only has 300,000 subscribers. I've been watching since May of 2020 and thought that by now it would be 3 million. I am a preschool teacher and I have another 2 teachers in my center watching you now. Great talks for around the proverbial water cooler. Thanks for your your thoughtful content and effort, Kirk and Stacy. I like it when people mention my wife because, yeah, she's a big part of this. So, yeah, okay. Well, so first off, yeah, we crossed the 300,000 subscribers finish line, so to speak, the other day. And people have been asking. In fact, I did an interview with a journalist, and she's also a fan, and she was asking, are you going to do a thing? Are you going to do a celebratory video or something? And no, I'm not. I have too many other things I got to do, and I don't know. I feel like that's a little self-aggrandizing, and plus 300,000. It doesn't really seem. There's certain birthdays where you're like, I turned 33. Who cares? So I feel like it's one of the, 500,000, 500,000 subscribers. That seems like a notable milestone. This seems like celebrating a half birthday or something, but it is kind of a thing. It is. I do look at that every now and then and sort of go, wow, But it's been kind of a steady climb over the past couple of years. So it's anyway. But you also say you thought by now it would be 3 million. I was also telling the journalist that I'm glad it is where it is, and if anything, it's too big already. So I don't want to be bigger. When you get bigger, I think you lose touch with your audience, or that would be a risk. And 2, you get a lot more scrutiny, and I don't need that in my life. That stresses me out. So let's just it reminds me of people in Seattle have always been this way, that there's a lot over the last 30, 40 years. There's been a lot of people moving to. There's been this constant influx of people to the Seattle area, and it just keeps growing and growing, and it all the housing goes through the roof in terms of pricing and congestion on the roads. And so people in Seattle who are born and raised like me will I don't usually say this, but people will say, like, if they're ever asked about, well, how do you like living in Seattle? It sucks. It rains all the time. Don't come. That kind of attitude. And so I kind of feel that way about the podcast and the YouTube channel. It's just like, I suck. Don't subscribe, honestly. In fact, I should probably, if I really feel this way, I should probably stop even suggesting that people subscribe. I mean, it's fine, but I really don't want it to get out of control. Bud Girl says, you are bang on with your opiate addiction story. You are bang on. Is that a British thing? You are bang on with your opiate addiction story. That was and still is my life. So I was talking about a common profile of someone that is prescribed opiates and then is like, oh my God, I finally feel normal, and then they become addicted. I've suffered from trauma and anxiety my whole life, and when I was in hospital, I was given opiates and eventually given 30 pills a day. Another sign that you're from the UK, and you said, I was in hospital. But anyway, I took the opiates for 10 years, and I'm now suing the pharmaceutical company, and I now take street drugs. But that first pill I took was the best feeling I've ever had, but that stops, so you take more. Before I was in hospital that day, I had never tried a drug in my life, and now I do it to get through the day, like you said. That doctor is a drug dealer with a prescription pad. Yeah, there's so many people who have been a victim of prescriptions. They're just like, oh, I had my wisdom teeth pulled, or I broke my foot or something, and okay, painkillers. All right, I'll take them. And then massive horribleness ensues. And yeah, pretty awful. Alicia says, I never comment on these videos, but Dr. Honda, you just described my life entirely, right down to the wisdom teeth medication, making me feel normal for the first time ever. Within a week, I was fully addicted. People don't realize it can happen to anyone and happen so quickly. And getting back off of them means your brain is even more imbalanced than it was before in the first place. It's an incredibly difficult, vicious cycle that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Yeah, Alicia, I'm so sorry. I've worked, like I said in the video, with people addicted to heroin and opiates, and it is just, it's so hard to kick the habit. It's so hard to get out of it. It's so hard. It's so hard. And it just, it just ruins your life. It just takes over. And, even with all the therapy and all the 12-step and all the treatment and all the support from the family, like, it's still really hard, really hard. And there are programs you can get on where you go on other meds to take the edge off, and you have 12-step, and you do the work. You tell everyone around you. You have sponsors during flashpoints and then you obviously get trauma treatment and anxiety treatment, to help you to recover so you can feel good naturally without the substance. So, there's hope, absolutely, but yeah, it's really hard. Lauren says, Hi, Dr. Kirk. This video sparked a question that I've had for some time, and I wanted your perspective. I've read that addiction, particularly to opiates, is fueled and motivated by the desire not to get high, but rather to avoid the horrible withdrawal symptoms, as I believe Johnny described in his experience. I've also read that addiction can stem from the innate human instinct to pursue dopamine and a happy state in general, and that it's in our DNA as humans to constantly seek this at all costs. Do you believe it is one or the other, or a nuanced mix of both? Yeah, that's a good question. It's complicated, and there are other paradigms that people will propose. You're mentioning kind of three different paradigms. One is that opiate addiction is to avoid withdrawal symptoms. Another is that opiate addiction is a natural, innate human desire to pursue dopamine. Another paradigm that you're saying is that it's a disease that people are basically born with, and they can't get away from it. They're just that way. And what I'll say is, there are other paradigms as well. And what I'll say is, you're kind of, one way of looking at these different paradigms is there's, I can't remember the exact label or title of this, but a frequent metaphor in my field is that you have a bunch of people that are blindfolded. You have 10 people who are blindfolded, and they're standing in a circle, and in the middle is an elephant. And so they've never seen an elephant before, and so they are all instructed to step forward until they bump into the thing and then describe the thing. So one person, it's like, oh, there's this flappy ear thing. Another person, oh, it's a trunk. Another person's like, oh, no, this is a leg thing. No, this is a tail thing. Well, they're all describing the same thing, but just from different angles, and that's kind of what this is. The other thing that I'll say is that it absolutely can be in the effort of getting high. Now, over time, the individual on opiates will learn to give up on that hope, because getting the original set of highs they learn might not ever happen again. They also hopefully learn that if they will chase that high, that's when you die, because you take way too much and then your heart stops and your breathing stops. And so a lot of people, they just fall into what Johnny Depp was talking about, where you're just taking it to get to normal, and you're just trying to survive. But it is true that people will abuse to get high, to have euphoria. Opiates can produce tremendous amount of euphoria. And again, that's when people risk killing themselves on accident. Alicia says, you seem to be a very empathic person. Do you ever experience empathy, burnout, or fatigue? Yeah, so we have a well understood concept in my field of compassion fatigue, empathy burnout, vicarious trauma, vicarious PTSD, secondary PTSD, and then you're right, Alicia, to say, well, you're empathic, so do you ever get burnt out? And I think that I'll answer that in two ways. One is that no, I don't experience compassion fatigue or empathy burnout, and haven't for a long time, and maybe haven't ever if I thought about it. I'm not really prone to it on one level. Part of it could be the sort of clients that I worked with, the people that experience a lot of burnout and compassion fatigue and secondary trauma are people that work, like I supervised some clinicians who worked at an agency north of Seattle and Linwood called Dawson Place, which specializes in treating kids who have been sexually abused, often by a family member. And the whole agency, that's all that they see, kids who were sexually abused. So every client that they see, every hour of every day is that client. And it's heartbreaking, obviously. So if I had a client like that, I might only have one or two clients like that in my week. But if I had like 40 or 50 clients on my caseload that were all in that situation, that'll take a toll. And so I've never had a career phase like that. So that's one thing that I'll say. I've always been pretty good about drawing various different boundaries in my work. I really value myself within the equation, meaning that I'll have colleagues that they don't really value themselves, and they'll just throw themselves into their work without ever checking in about how they're doing. Whereas I've never been that way. I've always, on average, monitored like, well, what's happening for me right now? Do I need to, because part of it is not just like drawing boundaries with your career, but just in session with your heart. If a client is going through something and I'm really open to them and I'm really compassionate and I'm, maybe even crying with them or something. And at some point in all of that, I realized that, I'm starting to fall apart a little bit here. Then in the moment, I'm still listening, but I pull back slightly. I don't go full in. And of course, I'm not doing my client any favors by falling apart personally, right? So I'll pull back a little bit. And there's a lot of things like that in therapy that you have to monitor, and with experience and good supervision, you can achieve that sort of thing. So, and it's important to know, Alicia, that just providing empathy empathy fatigue or compassion fatigue isn't because you gave a lot of compassion. When you are giving and giving to people that are suffering so much and you're not getting a lot of meaning out of it, or you're not getting a lot of gratification, you're not getting a lot of appreciation or any sort of indication that what you're doing is helping, because that's when you get burnt out. When you're working with a population that have, all the clients have multiple problems with their family, with school, with the law, with health, with addiction, with trauma, with, they just have multiple issues. And that's honestly a typical client, particularly in an agency. And all of your clients are like that. And you're working hard, compassion, working, thinking, coordinating, And at the end of the week, you can't see any growth or any change, positive change. And you might actually have most of your clients getting worse over time because of all the things they're facing. That's demoralizing. And that's when you get burnt out. And so I rarely had that. And in the beginning of my career, I certainly had periods of time like that. Another thing that just on the topic to you clinicians out there, for me, what helped me to have less burnout was actually making sure that I was getting paid well. I know that sounds bad, but this is a job, to be a therapist, it's how one pays their bills. And when you're at the beginning of your career, you novice therapists out there, I'm sure you're paying attention to this part, is that when you're at the beginning of your career, you're getting paid usually very little. You have tremendous debt from going to school, sometimes as much as $250,000, just imagine that. And if you're living in Seattle, rent is, $3,000 for a one-bedroom apartment or something. I don't know if it's that much, but it's close. You are also having all your clients who are, as I described earlier, and many of them might even be forced into therapy with you for various reasons. So you as a therapist have all these stresses that are, and while you're sitting in front of your client, it's meaningful and you're doing the work and you're doing great work and, you feel good about it. Your supervisor might be encouraging you, but you're just like, you look at your bills and you look at your debt and you look at the place you're living in and you're living like you did when you were, 19 years old, you're eating top ramen every day. It compounds. And so if you get paid though, appropriately in a fair way so that you can, have a nicer place and pay off your student loans. And, people could argue about the privilege of all that and I'd listen to it. But so if you get paid well enough, then at least one of the things that is bringing you down isn't there. And you might even have some optimism like, well, I'm actually earning extra money and I can start paying my debt down, or I can buy fancy top ramen. At least now that's not going to take away all the, the stressors, but at least it gives some hope to having some control over your career. There's many people that they fall into this pattern of, and they will email me or, and sometimes I'll have colleagues or past supervisees that will reach out to me in that rut. And they're just like, something's got to change. When I first graduated, it was fine, but now I can't do this anymore. It's too much. I love my clients, but I can't emotionally cope with what's happening right now. I, from the very beginning, was very careful about how I built my career. I was always very cognizant that if I didn't hustle, it wasn't going to happen. And I saw evidence of it around me. I saw, like senior clinicians that were in a position that they didn't like. And I was like, I don't want to be like that. And part of it's being a guy and feeling privileged and slightly narcissistic as well, that I'm just like, I'm not going to do that. And so I think that was another major element in me avoiding burnout, because every step of the way, I was either feeling at least that I was getting paid for my time well enough, or I could see it in the future, But again, I think the main thing is that I was raised well. And I've always had proper and supportive people around me to vent to if I needed to. Oh, another thing I'll say, just around the burnout, just one last thing, is that I've always really valued my free time. The journalist that I was talking about earlier, she was asking like what kind of things I do on my off time in terms of media consumption. And as I was saying, the podcasts and the YouTube channels and the subreddits I pay attention to, it occurred to me like none of them have anything to do with psychology, or very few of them. And I was like, my off time, I want to do something else. So I'll watch comedy or astronomy or history or science or travel or food or, just music. I don't want to consume. I want to do so. I think that I've always been that way too. I've always, after work, enjoyed my life. That's another part of it, because if you have no enjoyment in your life, burnout increases as well. Anyway, Coffee says, I moved a lot as a child. So we were talking about how Johnny Depp moved a lot. I moved a lot as a child, and it was definitely very hard always being the new kid, and therefore I was a target for bullies. I'm pretty sure that's partly why I find it hard to relate to people and make long-lasting friends now. Fortunately, I had an amazing teacher in 4th grade who recognized how damaging it can be for a child to keep moving and changing schools. So when I moved out of the school zone, but still within the city, she convinced the principal to let me stay at the school. I love you, Mrs. Cooper, if you are still around and reading through random YouTube comments. Well, Coffee, that's really sweet. And, you could reach out to Mrs. Cooper. Maybe she's even on Facebook, and you could thank her yourself. That's a huge part of helping someone not be burnt out, giving them meaning. So, but what a great story, and I'm sorry you went through that. Yeah, I mean, I talked about this in the video. It's like the impact of moving a lot on kids' development and psychology is underappreciated. KQ says, my experience with CPS, Child Protective Services, have been pretty bad, unfortunately. So I was talking about how, people have a misconception that CPS is horrible. But KQ says, my experience with CPS has been pretty bad, unfortunately. I believed they would provide resources and support, but when I got into contact with them, they ended up terrifying the kids I was trying to help and causing more harm than anything. Yeah, so I think KQ either is a therapist or a teacher or something, I'm guessing. But yeah, I didn't mention this, and I guess I should, that CPS, it's made of humans, and so there's a wide variety of humans who work there, and you're going to get some good ones and some bad ones. And so what I always recommend, and what I ended up doing, because that happened to me too, like one of the very first times I called CPS was this teenage girl was telling me that her father was sexually abusing her. It wasn't like overt sexual abuse. I won't go into the details, but it was things that I was just like, what she's describing is abusive, and she thinks of it as abuse anyways, because it was. And I call CPS, and so I was talking with her, and I'm like, we need to call CPS. And I was a mandated reporter anyway, but I was like, I think you should be involved in that. I think we should call together and know that we'll be here for you and we'll help you. And she's like, really? But what's going to happen? And I'm like, look, they want to protect you. CPS wants to help you, and I want to help you. And so we can, make this work. We don't know what they're going to do to your father, but at the very least, the abuse to you needs to stop, and this is the way. So I convince her, and we call, and long story short, CPS did nothing other than inform the father that the daughter has now told the authorities about his behavior, and it made him more angry, and now he hates me too. So our relationship was threatened because he could pull her out of he can't technically pull her out, but they effectively sometimes. So my recommendation to do this actually made things worse. And yeah, that's awful. Now, what I eventually learned was to find develop a friendship with a good CPS worker, which I did. I got to know one of them over the years, kind of randomly, but over the years, I would always call her, or if something else was happening, I would tell her, and she would totally understand. She was absolutely a wise individual, and so having an ally on the inside, can really help. Yeah, but so I should have said that. Ega says, "Oh boy, when you told the thing about the tone of voice," so I was talking about tone. I was saying, I think if someone tells you you have tone, believe them, because out of the thousands of moments where you have tone, only 0.1% of the time someone will tell you, because people don't want to bother you or whatever. So if someone tells you you have tone, you better believe you have tone. Now, I would say in a minority of the time, the person is accusing you of having tone when you don't. But at the very least, you should know how you're coming across, and it's important. And the reason why I say this is because so few people, when they're told they have tone, respond in a healthy way. Almost everyone in my anecdotal experience will be like, I don't have tone. What are you talking about? You're delusional. And I'm just like, this person is in relationship to you, and they wouldn't say that if it wasn't true. And so, and the other thing is no one knows they have tone. Very few people know that they have tone, that they have a bad, negative, angry, etc. sort of tone. Oh boy, when you told the thing about a tone of voice, I knew that it was about me. My future husband tells me this all the time, that I have tone, but I never understood what he was talking about. I never noticed that my tone of voice is negative sometimes. As a child, I was constantly criticized and abused mentally and physically by my mother in a house full of aggression and a father addicted to alcohol. I suddenly realized that I am becoming like my mother completely without knowing it. I stopped the video of yours and immediately called my husband to tell him how sorry I am. I want to go to therapy and learn more. At least I am aware now. Ega, how great is that? Look at you. How wonderful is that you actually were just like, oh my God, I have tone. He's been telling me I have tone, and I've been rejecting him, but now I'm not going to. And you immediately called him and told him how sorry you were. That's just so great. I can't imagine what he felt in that moment. I'm just like, hallelujah, because tone is the worst. It cuts through the soul. When someone has tone with you, it's just like, ugh. It ruins a relationship. So you're on the road to recovery. And of course, you laid it out there. You were constantly criticized and abused mentally and physically by your mother. That'll do it. That'll do it. Like, for me, I get tone. And one of the things that I learned over the years is people in my family have the same tone. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And I know what it's like to be the recipient of their tone. And I started, over time realizing, oh, that must be what it feels like. That tone that they just had with me, that must be the way other people feel with me. And so, boy, do I know. And so when people would say to me, you have tone, when I was at my best, would immediately be, oh, I'm sorry. And I would even say to the person, I know what that feels like because, so-and-so in my family do that to me all the time. So, and I don't notice that about myself, but that must have been what I just did. And I know how that feels, and it's awful, and I'm sorry. All you got to do is look in your family to know the tone that you will have with other people. And I hate to say this, but even people that abused you, people that you hated, people that you don't want to emulate at all, there's a chance that you absolutely have the same tone without even knowing it. It's unfortunate. Banana Envy, great name. I think you've commented before. I've heard you talk about suicidality on many podcast episodes, but today it hit me really hard. I've been having a very severe spike for the past week in suicide intention, despite enacting my support system and adding in an extra therapy session. Your message today has reminded me of the reality that these thoughts will pass and they are not fact. Thank you. I really needed to hear that today. Oh, well, I'm so glad. I mean, that was why I was saying it in the moment, because I was, with the amount of people that are watching and given percentages, suicidal thoughts are common. And so I was like, I bet you anything there's at least one person that needs to hear this, which is, it is a temporary thing. Spikes in suicidal motivation, they are almost all the time temporary. And so as long as you really beat that into your head when you have those episodes for a few days, you will know, let's give it a few weeks. I'll probably feel different in the future, and I don't need to act on it right now. And but I need to act on it in terms of I need to do my safety plan, which is what you're doing. You're increasing therapy sessions. You're telling people around you, I think, your support system, but, really getting that inside of your soul. And I hope that you have maybe even other people who have recovered from suicidal thoughts to talk to, because, having that experience can be really helpful, having that wisdom from people that have, come out the other side. Jane says, the clicking sound is the stenographer transcribing the court proceedings. Oh my God. Of course. Of course. It's the stenographer. It's the stenographer. That makes it so much better. I mean, because, it's a stenographer. It's necessary. You can't get away from it. You have to have the stenographer. And so, yeah, I mean, it's probably still going to be. Now, by the way, right now as we're recording, I've already recorded up through number 29, I believe. So I'm way out ahead in terms of the episodes that will be posted. Let's see, 30. So I've recorded up through number 30 of my reaction videos to the trial. And in terms of like the one that just published, I think it's number 21. So there's 9 more to come out, and I referenced the clicking noise in other videos, and so watch for that. but beyond 31, I'll know that it's the stenographer. Of course, it's the stenographer. Does she have to be so close to a microphone? Now, I think, well, who knows? Anyway, but it's so much more appealing because I was like, it sounds like gum, but it kind of doesn't sound like gum. And then I was like, it sounds like someone clicking their pen, but why would they be doing that all the time? I thought, well, maybe someone's under the table and they're nervous or something, and it's the stenographer. Oh my God, Jane, you're the best. All right, 90 Day Fiance, George and Anfisa. Megan says, the wild thing about this relationship is the more you watch, the more it becomes clear that Anfisa entered into this relationship being 100% transparent that it was a transactional relationship. Anfisa has never given any other impression that she was here for any other reason than for him to spend money on her and to be his trophy wife. That obviously doesn't excuse any of her actions that are abusive. Yeah, so I think that's what the show and or her are trying to portray, but I do not think, because so that's another thing. I've also watched ahead with Anfisa and George, and it takes me a while to get to this place. It might take me a few weeks of posting before I get to this place that I'm at now, which is that Anfisa, I think, deep down is desperate for attachment security in a way that is hard to detect because she acts so tough on the outside. I think she's a very vulnerable person emotionally, attachment-wise. But I think her way of protecting herself is, one, acting tough, and two, being hostile, and three, acting like she doesn't care, like she is in it just for the money. But I think she is deeply in it for attachment security, and it's clear because she gets triggered in some severe ways. And I think what's happening behind the scenes is George is seeing a totally different side of her, that vulnerable, desperate side of her. But then on camera, she's very, and she even seems kind of that way. Like when she is on camera, she seems restrained. She doesn't seem to be she never comes across to me as someone who's just spontaneously acting while the cameras are around. So, and of course, who knows what they're editing to make her look like an evil human. But because I know that's the narrative. It's like, she's from the beginning said, this is a transactional relationship. I'm in it for the money. I want a trophy wife. And I actually I don't think that's actually I don't think that's what she wants. And I think George knows that's not what she wants because he's seen her more vulnerable side, just a guess. Hannah says, the most annoying part of the American family being suspicious about the intentions of the foreigner is that they are acting like their family member is some prize. Yeah. Paulina says, the funny thing, as a Russian woman engaged to an American man myself, I have somehow internalized a lot of prejudice and am constantly worried that my fiance's family will view me as a gold digger and a mail-order bride, though there's no evidence to that whatsoever. Thank you for speaking up for us non-Americans. Yeah. Layla says, the way Dr. Kirk phrased that, it sounded like Dr. Honda just admitted he's broken into other people's houses. I can't remember what I was phrasing that would make people believe. So I made it sound like I have broken into other people's houses. Okay. Well, what else? So let me tell you. So I have already read this and then had a long response to it in which I talked about a story from my childhood, my teenage years that I've never told on the podcast before. At the end of it, I was like, no, that's too private. So I cut it. And so this is me now saying, essentially, I was a teenager and a young man at one point before my prefrontal cortex was fully developed or fully connected with the rest of my brain, and thus did not understand the consequences to my actions fully and did not fully appreciate my impact on other people. And me and my friends all of us were the same, and we would egg each other on, and we did not horrible things, but things that are not good and are bad, harmful, and again, not extreme, but definitely not things I'm proud of. So I told one story along those lines, and at the end of telling a story, I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, maybe one day I'll tell. And the journalist I was referring to earlier, I was talking with her because she was saying to me that she has questions about, my personal life that I've not answered on the podcast before. And, there's certain things about my family that I just won't answer. Not because there's anything interesting to reveal. It's, there's nothing interesting. It's incredibly mundane and normal. But there's just people that I want to protect their privacy. And I don't know, there's just certain things I just don't want to be up for grabs in terms of the public. Not that I'm not honest. I am honest. I don't lie. I'm authentic. I'm real. But I don't know, there's certain details about my life that aren't really even relevant and I don't know, I just don't feel comfortable with it. So the journalist was saying that she really wants to know the answers to those questions. And she compared me to, remember Wilson on Home Improvement with the fence? That I was kind of like that, the guy that you talk to, but you just don't really see the full him. And she was like, how do you deal with all the questions? And I told the journalist, I was like, actually, people don't ask me those questions. Occasionally they do, but not often. She's like, really? How do you think people would want to know? And I was like, I think you want to know because you're a journalist and you're naturally curious about other people, and you don't like being told that, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that question. And she was like, oh, maybe. But anyway, my answer to that question when she was interviewing me was that I do have a fantasy that at one point in my life, like when I turn 65 or 70 or something, and if I'm still podcasting, which I imagine I probably will, that I'll just, let go of all those boundaries and just be 100% honest about everything in my life at all times. Because, it's a bit of a chore to restrain myself when I'm triggered to tell a story that I might tell a friend, but I don't feel comfortable telling 7.5 billion people. Is it 7.5 billion? Anyway, billions of people on the planet. They're not all watching, obviously, but I just always have to remember, like, if you put it on the YouTube or in a podcast, like literally anyone can listen to that. And you just have to remember that. It's a small group that are, very small, but anyway, so I do have that fantasy of being able to be free and also to model that I'm a human being. And so I try to do that in other ways. But anyway, I'm not saying I broke in anyone's house, but I'm not saying that I was an angel. Bill and Shida, WM says, what should a person do if they apologize first within a disagreement or conflict and it's not reciprocated? Yeah, so I was talking about how, it's good to lead with an apology. It's good to get that going. And I also said, like, if you get into that game playing of just like, well, he didn't apologize to me last time, so I'm not going to apologize first this time. I'm just like, you can live by that principle and never be happy, or you can change it and actually try to be happy. WM says, I feel like I've encountered that more and more in my adult dating years, meaning that they would apologize and not have it reciprocated. To be honest, it's very frustrating and has resulted in me not really feeling like I want to be the bigger person in certain situations or date at times. So I'd be interested if there's an alternative than feeling like crud and forming resentment towards the relationship. What I was referring to is not to play a game in terms of, well, I'm usually the one that initiates X, Y, or Z, whether it's apologies or sex or date night or whatever. Like, if you get into that game, or even in friendship, right? It's like, I'm always the one inviting them. They never invite me. Like, life's too short than to get into that kind of gameplay. But if you are apologizing and they are not apologizing in reciprocation, then yeah, that's pretty demoralizing. So that doesn't mean you don't apologize, but it just means that if they don't apologize back, then feel free to say, by the way, kind of hurts that I apologize for my part, but you didn't apologize for anything that you did. And if that goes on and on, frequently, then yeah, I'm not saying to always take the blame for everything. I'm just saying, prime the pump, get the ball rolling. But if the other person doesn't reciprocate, then let them have it to some extent. Kira says, I became a patron over a year ago, and although I am a young student and don't use Patreon to watch your locked content, even though I'm young and I don't use Patreon to watch your locked content, but I still felt it was more fair to pay you since I watch almost all your videos the day they come out, even with a busy schedule, because they are more entertaining to me, and I feel like I'm literally getting university level lectures for free. Well, thank you, Kara. Yeah, so that's it. I don't know if I have really fully absorbed this phenomenon until you commented here, Kira, in that, in the beginning, for many years when I was on, because I've been on Patreon since 2015, and so until 2 years ago, I would say 99% of the patrons were motivated to become patrons because they wanted to get my, premium episodes that are my best episodes, or episodes that are more private, that kind of stuff. But then, the last couple of years, there's been a lot more people who find me through YouTube and consume only my content through YouTube, and they never care to go to Patreon, or they might not even listen to the audio podcasts that I post on YouTube. And I've been detecting that those people are also becoming patrons. just because they want to support what I'm doing, which of course a lot of YouTubers will do, say, hey, become a patron. And, usually there's little perks, but I don't, when I become a patron to things on Patreon, sometimes I don't consume their special things. I just want to support them, And so for those who are doing that, thank you so much. I mean, it's so cool. You're just doing it out of the goodness of your own heart. You're not doing it to get anything in return, which is cool. And you are getting something in return because, I sometimes say this, that every month there's lots of people who cancel or their credit card goes bad or something. And so we need this constant new group of patrons every month to keep our, to put it into concrete terms, literally to pay our bills so that I can dedicate the time to this. Otherwise, I have to go back to work at the university. I'm not threatening. I'm just saying that's the reality. I got to pay bills. And so, the income's got to come from somewhere. And a big portion of the income comes from Patreon. But, if you can't afford it, then, and a lot of people can't, then it's totally fine. I mean, there have been long spans of my life where there was no way I could afford even $5 a month, so I totally get that. The other thing is that another big portion of our income comes from YouTube ads. So just by watching my videos on YouTube, and I don't know this, but maybe even sitting through some of the ads, I don't know if that helps us, but I do know that just watching the videos, is also helpful. So, that's, and it's real, when you click. Cecilia says, thanks for your work. Currently, I can't become a patron. My financial situation is not the greatest. Your work has made an impact in my life to the point where I know I'm a more conscious person now. I pray for the day that I can support you and the work that you do. Well, Cecilia, like I said, just clicking, that's good. The video where I reacted to Dr. Darcy on the Nick Vile podcast, Nick actually asked me to comment on it and on his podcast, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll just do a reaction video. Math says, I used to apologize upon crying. Now that I'm aware of the stigma, I started thanking people for listening when I cry instead of apologizing for crying. That's great, Math. Cry, cry, cry. And I do that too. Because there's a certain point when you're kind of venting to someone and leaning on someone emotionally where you kind of realize what you've been doing. And I think a lot of people will apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, sometimes I'll do that if I feel like, there's certain things that I vent to my wife about very frequently over the years. And sometimes it's just like, I'm sure you don't want to hear me talk about this again, but I feel like I need to emotionally. So sometimes I'll apologize, but I'm not really sorry. It's more just like I acknowledge that it must be kind of annoying. But thinking I will also do. I just like, hey, thanks for listening, because you mean it, and there's nothing to apologize for. How to Wear White says, Dr. Honda, you are the Mr. Rogers for adults of our times, helping us. So I was talking about, I'm not Mr. Rogers, but helping us all out there to understand ourselves, each other, and people out there who behave in ways that might scare us, even harm us. Thank you for normalizing our challenges, traumas, and pain. Well, thank you. It's just a huge compliment. Mr. Rogers is the more I think about how, this was another thing I was talking to the journalist about today, which is how important Mr. Rogers was to me when I was a child. So much so that after my conversation with the journalist, I'm working on, we moved recently, and so I've been working on putting posters in the bedroom. People don't usually go in people's bedrooms, and so I thought I could just decorate however I wanted to without making it look nice. I could just do it. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to go back to my childhood where I would put posters and stuff on the wall just with thumbtacks. Because you get to a certain age and you feel everything has to be framed and everything has to look nice, and it's just like, just bedroom, I just want to. And so after talking to the journalist today, I ordered a Mr. Rogers poster online so I can put it up in my bedroom. Porcupine says, my feelings about Dr. Darcy have nothing to do with sexism. Right, so I was talking about, a lot of people are attacking her, and there were some things you could viably criticize her for, but it wasn't that bad. And I was like, why are everyone going after her so much? And Porcupine says, my feelings, and I was wondering if it was sexism. My feelings about Dr. Darcy have nothing to do with sexism. She reminds me of Dr. Phil with her cliched sound bites. I was never a fan of Dr. Phil's either. I was skeptical when she said, my clients are gifted and talented, killing it in life. That struck me as someone who wants to get paid without working too hard as a therapist. Then she sits on her high horse, surrounded by privilege, and has the audacity to call out others for the same thing. Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of people that felt that way, and I think that's absolutely valid. There's a charitable explanation about all those things. If she had an opportunity to hear the feedback and respond, maybe she already has, maybe she'd be, you're right. Well, who knows what she would say? I don't know. Allison says, thanks for touching on coordinated care, especially for folks with substance use disorder. I work at a telehealth addiction treatment program, and it hurts my heart to hear therapists turn people away to deal with their unwanted substance use when they really need a multi-pronged support system. The rejection, loneliness, and hopelessness so many people have felt is often perpetuated by stigma, even unintentionally. Yeah. The Sky says, if I was looking for a therapist with your style of practice and expertise, what keywords or descriptions would I look for? Yeah. So all this is on my website because people will email in and say, it's a very common question. It's a good question. It's an important question. But I get it so often that I just have this statement on the form that says, like, I don't really know therapists. I don't know therapists in your area. My practice is full. And if you're looking for a therapist that is in the area of theory and practice that I talk about, then you want to look at words like attachment, psychodynamic, humanistic, relational, systemic, trauma-informed, maybe references to corrective experiences, maybe references to healing as well. These kinds of keywords are potentially indicative of someone that operates from a theory similar to mine. But it's not a sure thing. There are plenty of people that will mention attachment in their profile online, and they don't know anything about attachment, or they don't use attachment in the way that I do. There are plenty of people that will say they're trauma-informed, and they really don't get it. So, look for those words, I think, and then trial and error. I always tell people, go to 5 therapists, pick the best one. There's a pretty good chance you're going to get, a good therapist that way. And I know some places or some areas, even in the States, you don't have that luxury, and I get that. And it's a problem. It's a problem. It's a big problem. And the solution is for governments to allocate tax dollars to have more therapists around, particularly in areas where there aren't a lot of therapists, and around the world. So that's the solution, and that would be fair and the right thing to do. So comments on my comments video from last week, Valeria says, LOL, I'm pausing at the point where you said people justify mutual abuse because, we're fiery people and they come from a part of the world where that's normal. You read my mind because I'm Latina, and I was thinking we really need to stop feeling proud of the fact that we all grow up abused or witnessing abuse and expect mutual abuse from relationships. That's pretty much why I'm so interested in channels like yours. I've had to work really hard to learn how to engage in relationships, even friendships, in a non-toxic way. Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm sure I wasn't talking about Latina people. Was I talking about South Koreans? But anyway, yeah, that idea that you're saying from your experience, I've never heard this before, that a lot of Latinas will have been through abuse, and that's normalized to them. And then, of course, they might be prone to be abusive or toxic in a relationship, aggressive, hostile. And then when they're confronted on it, they're just like, look, this is the Latin way. This is how we are. We're fiery down there, as if that somehow excuses it. And okay, on one hand, are we misinterpreting from the outside this individual's behavior as being hostile when it isn't really hostile? It's just more blunt, That's a cultural slider, if you will, that changes by culture. Or is it just so normalized in their culture to be abusive that they don't even know what abuse is. They don't even know the line between abusive and healthy. And so I think that's what you're saying from within your own culture, Valeria. Mallory Osugi, sounds like a fellow Japanese person, says, I just discovered your videos through your commentary on the Depp Heard trial. I was initially raging against Amber, but you're the only commentator who made me actually consider Amber's side and actually feel empathy for her, even if I don't believe all she says. I really appreciate your more thoughtful and less biased take on the trial. Oh, well, thanks. Last comment here. Kate says, number one, I am a scientist and I love listening and learning from your qualified psychological perspective. I would argue that human psychology is more hard science than you're giving yourself credit for, but that it's more like statistics than algebra, in that behavior may correlate with an experience without definitively implying causation. Human behavior isn't formulaic, but let's remember that science is simply the best answer we've found so far for a problem. Yeah, just chiming in here, Kate. Yeah, I appreciate this, and you're right. But when I refer to my perspective of psychology not being a quote-unquote hard science, is that I'm responding or criticizing or trying to push back on people that claim that it is super algebraic, as you're putting, your statistics versus algebra. There are people in my field, and there's certainly lay people, who have been misinformed that psychology and a lot of things that we say are more algebra than statistics. And of course, statistics are hard for everyone to understand, probabilities and bell curves and stuff. And so, I try to emphasize that. And you'll hear me use that in my language. I'll say, borderline people will do this, not all the time, because it isn't all the time. Or I'll say, on average, I'm frequently kind of putting that in there so that we understand that it's a potentially predicted behavior or outcome. But I absolutely also agree with what you're saying, and that totally fits with my paradigm, which is the way that I see people psychologically is absolutely the best answer that I've found so far to the problem that people present to me. It's a model for understanding. I don't, all the stuff that I talk about in terms of attachment theory and psychodynamics and internalizations and projection and all that kind of stuff and systems theory, it's all theoretical, it's all a model. And there is evidence for these concepts, but it's more statistics than algebra, right? It's more like averages and tendencies. So, and particularly when I have someone come into my office, I can't know if any of that applies to them. But it's the best answer that I've got to address their problem. It's a model. It's a way to understand. But I can't. If someone else came along and said, no, your conceptualization is wrong, and I have a completely different conceptualization, I can't say to that person they're wrong. I can just say, well, that's the model that works for them. And I know that can be a little unnerving to think that we're just sort of shooting in the dark, but that's just the way that it is. Number two, Kate, you say, we don't want you to spread yourself too thin. I was talking about it. Your mental health is important. The Depp and Heard trial was an opportunity that I'm glad you couldn't allow to pass by. You might not have planned for this in your schedule, but your reflections from it are absolutely fascinating, and you detect data points that I wouldn't hear on my own. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, but maybe it would be healthy to scale back on other things. Nobody urgently needs you to be covering George and Anfisa now, for example. I'll be grateful whenever you have time to cover new content. I have appreciated the podcast reruns. They were new to me. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks, Kate. And I'm sure a lot of people had that reaction because I was like, complaining about my self-imposed workaholism. But I'm doing okay. I see absolutely a light at the end of the tunnel. The trial can't go on forever, for example. The 90-Day Fiance stuff is a little light these days, actually, so because it's the beginning of the season, there's not a lot to say. Yeah, me and my wife Stacy went out the other night for dinner, and and I had a lot of work that I was wanting to get to, but she wanted to go to dinner, and so we did. I go for walks, a couple times a day, and so it's okay, but I can't go at this pace anymore for forever. I can't go at the pace forever. So, but yeah, thanks, and that's nice. But even if And everything you're saying is true. It's just like, you don't have to work that hard. But when I commit to something, I see it through. And so unless something really kind of drastic happens to me and my health or something, like I'm not going to slow down until I see it through. But there's an end point to this current sort of wave of work that I'm doing. And I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me at all. I'm at that age where you start to really monitor your health. You go to the doctor more often. I measure my blood pressure. I have a home thing. You really are careful about your sleep and your diet. So, I have a pretty good gauge on how I'm doing psychologically and physically, and I'm okay. There's no signs of that I'm coming apart at the seams. All right, people. And that does it for that. This has got to be the longest one of these I've ever done. And take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.